Welcome, everyone. I'm Hui Ling Ke, moderating this session. I'm the Membership Secretary for BAS. I'm very proud of this special session we have on diversity and how to reduce unconscious bias in spinal practice. The truth is, all of us suffer with unconscious biases, and the more we're aware of them, the better we can treat our own trainees and also, of course, our patients. So without further ado, I've introduced our first speaker, Shreya Srinivas, who is an adult and pediatric deformity surgeon in Sheffield. But she's much more than that. I've known Shreya for many years. She came to the UK as an overseas graduate. She was a mother of 2 during her training. And I'm really excited to hear her talk about her perspective and experiences of unconscious bias. So thank you, Shreya.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think most of us here are surgeons or healthcare professionals who really want to achieve the highest standards we can in our professional interactions. Most of us here are ambassadors of our profession, but I don't think we always know how we are perceived by other people who see us. And I'm here to talk about what could be one of the reasons for that. And I really want to thank UKSSB, BAS exec, and everybody who made this happen and invited me to talk and give my thoughts about this. First things first, get your phones up. I'm going to find out what my audience has as its bias and explore it. So father and son are in a car crash, dad dies, son's taken to the hospital, needs surgery, and the surgeon walks in and says, "I'm really sorry, I can't operate on this boy, he's my son." Any idea who the surgeon is? I'll give you a few questions because this is bias. This is your automatic association of who you think the bias is. I got it on my phone, it doesn't work on this, so I'll wait to see what you guys do. Oh, you guys are doing very well, I don't have to give this talk. Very well. The ones who said the mother, well done, you got it right. I'm going to try to see, this mouse doesn't work. I'm going to try to see if this works. Have a look at this. Oh.
They get into a car accident. The dad dies. The son gets rushed into A&E.
Yeah.
The surgeon says, "I cannot operate. This is my son." Who's the third? Oh my gosh!
Well, it could be his biological father because he's adopted.
The father of the boy.
A ghost? A priest?
The surgeon's the dad.
The father?
The father died, so
Yeah.
it can't be the father.
It's down to God to say.
God?
The wife had an affair with the surgeon.
Either a stepfather or biological father.
His brother.
Surgeon's the mother.
Oh my god, yes! It makes so much sense.
Damn! Oh, that's annoying!
That's terrible, isn't it?
Oh.
Yeah, obviously.
Oh my god.
Very well. Basically, that means that and the people who looked at this, Deborah Bell, who did this, because young people and even self-proclaimed feminists cannot fathom in the riddle that the surgeon can be a she. I would strongly urge you to go home and try this at your dinner table, and I've tried it with my friends. The answers I've got when I've asked the questions are hilarious. But I will tell you why this could happen. So I look at this picture, and this is a picture of all the people who've inspired me and shaped my life to become a pediatric spinal surgeon. I got this as a moment of my fellowship year. I took it home. We were moving. My son saw this. He was 4 years old at that time, and he goes, "Amma, why do you only work with men?" And I realized that's what a 4-year-old sees, and that's what probably a lot of young people see. If that is their bias, that they just think every surgeon is a man, it's probably going to lead to that. But 4 years on, I can show him that this is the team I work with. I work with men and women who help me look after my patients, and we look after them very well. And I work with as many women as I work with men. And my son was asked the surgeon dilemma question, and he says, shrugged his shoulders, "Why, of course it's the mum." And I'm very glad in 3 years his perception has changed, and you can't change it. So basically, having a bias doesn't make you a bad person. We all have biases. We will have an affinity to someone who looks like us. We'll want to copy them, and we'd want to meet them for a cup of coffee. It's how our brains make decision processes to automatically do those life or death decisions based on everything we have learned. But when that bias becomes something negative and starts creeping into our work where there's unwanted discrimination, then it becomes a problem. My first trainer told me, you are female, you're Indian, and you're right-handed. And I would have been offended had he treated me differently to his white, male, left-handed trainee. He didn't. He treated me the same, but what he opened up to me was the complete realization that the world is biased towards right-handed people. It's really hard being a left-handed person. Doors don't open for you correctly. Our surgical instruments are made for right-handed people, and it is difficult. So I realized his biggest problem with me was that I was right-handed, none of the other things, and he treated me very well. But the first thing to do is that you acknowledge you have a bias. We all have one. People named Julie are less likely to get an interview than somebody named John. Tall people are attractive and successful. Every Fortune 500 CEO is 6 foot tall. Look it up, it's true. Say you start explaining the behaviors of people you like or don't like, because seeing how they are. So if you like someone and you respect them and he shouts at it, and you just say, oh, he was having a stressful day, that's why he shouted at you. But if it's not, you'll say, well, actually, he's a bully, he doesn't like doing that. So the first thing to know is we all have a bias. We need to understand it and see how it's perceiving us. So the researchers in Harvard had come up with something called the implicit association test. I would urge you all to take one. I will give you the link later. So when I was doing this talk, I said, let me find out what my bias is. And I started with the obvious one about gender. And I have to share with you that I have a moderate automatic association to associate men with career and women with family. I'm even more embarrassed to say that my white male European colleagues who took this have a slight association. So on reflection, I do think it's my cultural background. I grew up in a culture where women are homemakers, so maybe that's how I think it is. But do take it. It's a lot more than just gender and about race. So why should we talk about it at BritSpine? We all have a bias. We know about it. But I think it's time we looked at ourselves as an organization, at what we do, at the leadership hierarchy as a group. The college has looked at itself. The college has 28,000 members. It's predominantly white male in most leadership positions as examiners. And it's not representative of medical school. 50% of the population is women, 50% of medical school are girls, but only 14% are in surgical specialties as consultants. For other specialties, that is 37%. So there's something not going in the right direction. GMC suggests that surgical and orthopedic trainees, there are lesser women and there are lesser overseas graduates. And I'm sure Wei Ling has done it. It's a little bit less in spine surgery as well overall. So what can we achieve? I think what we need to do is start welcoming diversity in our teams, start having those conversations, because we can all complement each other's skills. It also means that you don't have to be a marginalized group, but if you see someone who is, you can probably say, have an allyship. Just try to say, like, what have you learned? What happens to you if you're faced in the same situation? And we meet people at the most vulnerable, and we all develop resilience various ways. And if we can start supporting our colleagues, reducing burnout, having a conversation, it means we will attract the brightest and the best. And that means people will look at us and say, oh, actually, I want to be a spine surgeon. And that means we get the good people and we can take it back to our patients, and we will be very good as a workforce to look after our patients. You can all turn around and say, you know what, I've done my mandatory training, I know how diversity works, we've all sat there, I've done it, and they say, no, we're not quite woke brigade, but we're getting there, and we're doing that. But training doesn't change attitudes. We don't like to be told what to do, and creating a label can actually create a stress. Suddenly we're not sure whether we can say it, or not evolve or change with times. I'm good at getting genders. I'm still working my head around pronouns, understanding these things, and I'm frank about it. I don't think it's wrong to say you have a bias or you can't understand it. I think it's worse when it starts creeping into how you treat that person or how you behave with that person. I think what would be better is to bring all these diverse groups together, like we're doing now, start having conversations, start talking about those uncomfortable things and positive engagement, and go to the medical schools, because medical students are told at year 2 or year 3, oh yeah, orthopedics is not a career for you, surgical. It's not true. There are just as many hard, other specialties which has long hours, which expect other demands from you. We can help at BAS and say, we start doing preferential rates for our students, stop charging for our students, create bursaries for our medical students to bring them in and say, spinal surgery is an exciting place for you to do research and study, and we will encourage you. It's, like I said, not about equality, it's about equity. The more you start talking about it, you'll realize a 6-foot surgeon is fine, your 4-foot surgeon needs a higher step. If you're in a wheelchair, you need other adaptations. And the reality is so far behind. I'm not really sure all of us who I said are not in the marginalized group fully understand how bad it is for the other person. So just think about what opportunity the other person needs and have the conversation. BAS made an excellent start. We had the WISE meeting, and I think a lot of this workshop and this talk has originated from this meeting. It was very nice for me to meet some other women who had shared and lived experiences with me, and also some of my male colleagues who came, and we had a conversation about what it's like to be, women in spine surgery. But what it also made me aware about was that it's just not factors that focus on gender that will make a difference. And that is actually proven in research, saying if you unduly target it on gender, sometimes it has negative effects. And you have to look at multiple factors to address these. And these are the two things I took away from the meeting as a common theme. We all felt what made us, our lived experience was getting good mentorship and guidance, and that we had to address the process of recruitment and retention and promoting them. So the recruitment bias, we are a different generation. It's a changing phase of medical education. It's a changing phase of child-rearing practices, and you don't want to lose out on a talented and diverse pool of individuals because of the bias you may be perpetuating as individuals or through your organization. I like my hashtags, and I think we are a group of baby boomers and zillennials, and it's Generation Z Alpha who are digitalized, who live on social media, who like to see people, and we need to become aware of that. So the retention bias. So this one, I actually realized I don't belong to the new generation. I will belong to the older generation. I was told I cannot be a full-time mom and a spine surgeon. And I was the last one amongst my cohort to get a consultant job. All my friends had become hand surgeons, pelvic surgeons, everything else, because you had to do more fellowships. And I thought those were the things putting off my colleagues. I've had anecdotal chats with a lot of the colleagues here about what stops people from coming into spines, but I decided I will take this back to the trainees I've trained in the last 4 years and see what they think. And this is a Google survey, mainly amongst orthopedic trainees, and they are actually undecided. They like spine surgery, and they don't like it because they think it can be physically demanding or litigious. But by the time they come to their mid-years of training, they don't like it because they haven't seen enough of it. They don't like doing microscope work, apparently, and they don't like complex patients. It's not because they don't think you can be a parent. It's not because they think it's long, but most of them said they like the fact that they're positive role models, and they said things. But there is an affinity bias here, because you see I work in Sheffield. We are a very happy group of people who enjoy our company in and out, including being a very inclusive team who had their first annual South Yorkshire gender-neutral cricket team. And we all got to play, and I won't say who won, but yes, we had a very good time. And this is what they see. And what that's made me realize is that if you're a role model in a leadership position, be visible, mentor and amplify and sponsor your trainees. And if they see and relate someone like you, they would want to come up and strive for that. And you can amplify that effect. And I'm a big believer in the whole lift as you climb thing with the Royal College tries to promote, and I think that would be good. But as an organization, we can start mentorship programs. BSSH and BHS are doing it. It is research which suggests that white men tend to not offer their mentorship to women and minorities, and men tend to drift to each other around, whereas women and minorities are helped by formal programs. And it is important to realize that we work with vulnerable people. There was this excellent talk last year about the surgeon being the second victim, about how we go through difficult times. I think we need to start normalizing help-seeking behavior. You need to develop a lot of resilience to do what we do, and I might not become resilient like you do, and I think it's important we realize that it's okay, and we need to support our colleagues and try to have those conversations and see how lived experiences are, and that would be helpful even at an organizational level. So in the end, I want to conclude saying, be aware we all have an unconscious bias. That's the QR code if you want to take your implicit biasing. Honestly, if you're going back on a train for 3 hours, there's plenty of time you can do with that. It's really good fun. Start having those conversations. Start thinking about why you think that way about one person. As in, why don't I like them? Why don't I like her? Is there something about the way they say? And it's the same for patients. Some patients annoy us. And you just want to think, like, why is it? Can I change my thing and focus on that? And I would also urge you as surgeons to read this excellent article, which has helped me shape this talk, by the Royal College of Surgeons, and my very good colleague, Meg Burks, who's done a lot of work with hand surgery, who let me borrow some of the research and slides. And I will leave you with this to say, we've just had the Spinopelvic Disassociation talk. It's a complex trauma theater. This is what it can look like in Sheffield. There was not a man inside, and it's a team of women that have treated a complex trauma, and that's what it is, and that should challenge your bias if you have thought about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shreya. We'll take questions at the end. We've got another 15 minutes at the end for the questions. So I'd like to turn next to Sophie Turner. Thank you, Sophie, for joining us. Sophie is a diversity and inclusion professional, and she's also a qualified leadership coach, and she does often advise industry on how to improve their diversity profiles and strategies. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you. There will be some crossover between Shreya and I, which just means we're singing from the same hymn sheet, I will say. I will take it from a slightly different angle. I'm not a medical professional, so if I try and pull in some, what I think are really clever examples that I'm trying to equate to medical profession and surgery, and I get it completely wrong, I apologise now. My caveat is I'm sort of making it up to some extent. But similar point, really, when we're talking about people who go or get accepted onto medicine and dentistry degrees. I know Shreya said about 50% in terms of medical school. So we've got 50% women in medical school. At the minute, we've got, on average, 14.7% of consultants are women. We should see a far closer correlation than that, okay? There is nothing that states men are more capable. Men are better, okay? So there's something else at play here, because statistically that doesn't make sense. There is a long way to go. You can see that there has been progress. One of my things is actually we need to focus on the positives, and progress is being made. But what we have here today in the room, okay, so not just our colleagues back at work, but people in the room here who have the power, who have the influence, who have the freedom to start changing things, all right? So women have got the same ambition. So when we're talking about these students who go into medical school, they will have exactly the same level of career ambition than their male colleagues, okay? However, as they go through our careers in our infancy, the first 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, the lack of role models that I would have as a woman, who am I looking up to? I can see commonalities. We talk about bias. We've mentioned bias. I have bias as well. I have affinity bias. Okay? I can look around this room and instinctively know who I would be drawn to from a safe perspective, who I'd want to talk to. And that's bias. I don't know anyone from Adam or Eve. Okay? So, we have this, there you go. This is what I get paid to do. We have the same career ambition, but if I can't see someone who's doing it, who I have that affinity for, that can impact my motivation. To worst case scenario, what's the point? Okay? Equally, if I look at consultants who have a particular skill set, who have particular characteristics, particular behaviours, particular, ways someone might carry themselves. I don't see that in me. I would think, right, well, I can't do it like them. So why should I bother? Again, I'm talking about worst case scenario, okay? It might be I'm going to have to change, I'm going to have to adapt what I say, what I wear. I'm going to have to take up golf. I'm going to have to watch Match of the Day on a Saturday night and try and pretend that I'm a Crystal Palace fan. That is not a real life example, but it could be, all right? So it is important that we acknowledge that there is nothing different between males and females in the infancy of our careers. McKinsey and an organisation called Lean In looked at the difference between females and our sort of career progression and males. The first thing that they acknowledged was unconscious bias. So our bias has an issue, and Shreya used the example of the surgeon, okay, mother, father example. I'm going to ask you now just to think about, and I'm going to use quote unquote rough area, okay, where you grew up. We're talking actually in proper terms, we're talking about lower socioeconomic areas, all right? So kids that haven't got access to the same opportunities as others. Think about the type of person that is from that area. That's your unconscious bias. Some of you, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, might have assumed someone's intelligence might be lower. They're going to do a more menial job. They're not necessarily going to have professional qualifications. They might not be as bright. They might have behavioural problems. Based on what? Yep, you might have experienced that with an individual growing up. But what we do with unconscious bias is we'd have that broad brushstroke. Everybody from that area. Okay? I don't know if anyone well, I'm sure there are some from in and around Nottingham or work there. Talk about the Meadows or St Anne's as areas where there's this extreme sort of low socioeconomic status. We write off groups of people because of our unconscious bias, okay? Lack of support and advice. Shreya again mentioned about mentors. Women are better or access formal systems. We have things called informal and formal systems. Informal systems, going for a drink after work, playing golf, having a chat in the corridor, okay? If I've got all of these biases and I'm drawn to particular types of people, I'm going to talk to particular types of people. They're going to have access to my expertise and my knowledge. Women are 24% less likely to be offered advice than men in their careers. If I'm not offered advice, I don't get the chance to ask questions and learn, number one. Number two, you won't know me from Adam or Eve, again. Number three, you might think, well, she's all right, she's solid, she does what she's supposed to do. She's not got any ambition because I've never spoken to her. I've never heard of her before. What it is I don't play bloody golf. Or I don't watch the rugby or the football or any of these things. Okay? It isn't because it is anything to do with my ability. The third one, which I say is a contentious one, it's not. It's lack of self-promotion. So it's all very well me saying, you all need to change. Obviously, some of it comes from ourselves as well. And it's important to acknowledge that. We need to do everything we can in our power so that if anything is holding us back, it's not on us. So that lack of self-promotion. And this is simply about the perception of self-promotion. Giving myself a pat on the back. How is that viewed as a woman, if a woman does it, versus how is that viewed if a man does it? I should have caveated at the beginning of my talk that I talk in generalizations a lot. All right, so I know I'm making some broad statements and broad brushstroke, but there is a lot of resonance, a lot of it is true, okay? When a man typically has and it's not like, look at me, I'm a great, it's just a case of, I've done this. Did you see that? See what we achieved. I really, you come out and you've got that adrenaline surge of what patient you've just treated, okay? That's self-promotion, and that is seen as really normal. You wouldn't even think twice if a male colleague did it. However, what does happen is when women do the same behaviour, it is seen as negative. So all that happens is, as a woman, if you see an eye roll, or you're like, you get whatever response you get back, you think, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm just going to get my head down and work. What happens then? We become the reliable one, the one who just gets on, the one who doesn't cause any problems. But equally, the one who doesn't have the career ambition. Well, I didn't know she wanted it. She's never said so. Well, she did say so. It's just that she got shot down, so she's not going to say it again. Okay? So it's important to think about how we encourage people. We will talk about tips and things for us to work on it, how we can encourage people to speak up, to shout about our achievements and our strengths and our wins. All right? There are, and I won't dwell on this one because Shreya mentioned the various different types of bias, so I think we've actually covered off different ones, and we'll say unconscious. We don't know about it. It's built up as a result of our childhood, our experiences. Okay? Someone saying something. You know, my dad says something to me as a kid, I'm going to believe it. And therefore that sinks in. The halo effect is when one characteristic of a person is used to form an overall opinion. Well, they went to that medical school, so they must be fantastic. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. Am I allowed to swear? Yeah? They could be an absolute dickhead. But if they've gone to that medical school, let's give them a job or an opportunity. Okay? What we do with bias is we fall into the trap of being drawn to a person, and we have to do it. We have to make, and like I say, I don't have the stats, and I'm not a scientist, not a medical professional, but we have to filter so much information. That's what bias is. It's our brain's way of filtering all of the different information points and picking out what it wants us to think about, to focus on. We have to go against that. Okay? Affinity bias is that unconscious, as I've said, that unconscious preference for people who have characteristics similar to us. So I could go around the room and point to you lot who I have an affinity to. You might be a dickhead, but if we look the same, or if we're similar age, or we've got some type of characteristic, that's what's going to have the overriding factor on me. Hopefully, you can all see how that could impact our recruitment choices, the conversations we have, the advice we give, how open we are to questions, how open we are to mentoring and opportunities. Okay? Our bias has a huge impact on us. What I will say is, it is completely normal. All right? What we have to do is acknowledge it. So, when we're talking about challenging our bias, we can reduce it, but it is on us to do that. All right? Nobody can challenge our own biases. We have to turn the lens on ourselves. And this is where it gets really crap, actually, because sometimes we'll turn the lens on ourselves and think, oh, I wish I hadn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that, or, well, you know, I've had to do this. Have I turned the lens on and I think, oh, actually, should I have said that? That was probably really offensive. We take it on. We take it on and make sure, actually, yeah, we own it, we just don't do it again. Okay? So, in no particular order, despite it being a flowchart, we have to accept that we all have biases. We do. One of the ways that we can prevent our biases sort of taking over us, as it were, is making considered decisions. All right? So, sharing out the amount of time people have to question you or, you know, ask for your advice. Sharing out opportunities, almost like a rota system. All right? Making sure that it isn't just the person who puts their hand up or shouts the loudest or answers first that gets your time. And it's hard because you're time poor, you're really bloody busy, you're juggling however many balls that you've got in the air. But that's the only way we will allow people, we will widen the goalposts. Shreya spoke about equity. Another way of thinking that, it's not about moving the goalposts, it's not about taking opportunities away from people, it's widening them so more people can score a goal. Okay? We have to monitor our behaviour. When we recruit, okay, or when we promote, whatever it may be, actually, did I do that? Did a bias lead me to do that? The more we can make our unconscious biases conscious, we can do something about them. Okay? Learn about people. All right? Expand our minds. There's a task. In the interest of time, I won't get you to do it, but there is a task that you can do when you look at the last 5 books you've read, and not like journals, like books, the last programs you've watched, the last music artists you've listened to. In the vast majority of cases, the majority of those authors, main lead characters or actors, or musicians, artists, will have characteristics similar to you. Now, mine's Beyonce all day, every day, but she is female at the very least, okay? So the more you can Google and research and watch and read and change what you're Googling, change what you're watching. Don't just click on the Netflix recommended for you. Okay, we have to go against these algorithms. It's even worse at the minute because we're sort of told instinctively what we should be reading and watching and learning. Go against it, okay? Avoid making assumptions on gut instinct. Who are we to know anything, okay? Yeah, that's easy, but that's not necessarily the right option. Time, territory, and tasks. What time makes it easy for everyone? So we think about, is it less than full-time hours, the phrase that we use, the terminology? Someone who does less than full-time, which is probably an irony in a statement in itself, but we'll go with it, okay? What time have you got this handover, or this meeting, or this call, okay? Where? Can someone even make that? Or actually, have they got to go and pick the kids up? And think about the tasks. Are you sharing them out fairly so everybody has the same access to the same opportunity? Okay? And then we need to hold other people to account as well. And when we talk about holding other people to account, this is about something we call intentional inclusion. It is a conscious decision, choice that we're making, all right? If we don't change our approach, nothing will be different. And as far as I'm aware, in terms of, we'll talk about surgeons particularly, the numbers are reducing in terms of coming into, whether it's spinal surgery. I'm looking over for some type of nod. I'm not getting any okay, but I'm going with it.
Numbers.
Pardon?
Overall numbers.
Overall numbers?
Of surgeons being recruited.
Well, yeah, let's take that. If that's right, Shreya, we'll take that as fact. I'm taking that as fact. So we need to attract more people in. All right? So we need to think differently. We need to approach things differently. It's not going to happen overnight. But what I will say is, generally in the UK, straight white men are in charge. When we talk about our government, we talk about our financial systems, our judicial systems. Okay? So those of us who are in positions of responsibility, who have the opportunity to influence, to promote, to create opportunities, use that, okay? Don't be afraid of thinking differently. Diversity and inclusion, when it's done properly, we have greater problem solving, we have greater innovation, we have greater creativity. Think of it like rugby. You don't have 15 props on the pitch. You might not concede any tries, but you certainly aren't going to score any. So we build our teams based upon the skills that we need. We have different skill sets, okay? Diversity of experience, diversity of thought, all matters. It all adds into the pot. And one of the most powerful things, actually, when we're talking about resilience from a surgeon's perspective, the construction industry has started to diversify. I do quite a lot of work in the construction industry. It started to diversify. And what has happened is that diversification has massively increased the response to mental health and breaking down the taboos when it comes to mental health. Why? Because all of a sudden, and I'm talking in general terms now, all of a sudden you've got a woman on site or in the office who's that shoulder to cry on, who says, yeah, it's okay for you to talk to me about your feelings. And all that happens is these barriers break down. So we all benefit from a diverse and inclusive environment, whether that is from, like I say, a career progression or a creativity perspective. It can also help us all as individuals, all right? I'm yet to find a negative when it comes to inclusion. Yes, if it's implemented incorrectly, as we've referenced, that is a problem. But that's all about communication. What we're trying to do is create an environment where everybody feels valued and everybody has the opportunity to fulfill their potential. Some of you might think, well, I'm already providing that. I can say, hand on heart, everything that I'm involved in, I'm already doing that. Most of us can't, and that isn't a criticism, that's a start point. Okay? That's me done.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Shreya. Great talks. We'll open the floor to questions. Please, Al.
I was wondering what the difference is between intentional inclusion and positive discrimination or affirmative action, and if there is a difference, how we can implement that positively, and if there isn't a difference, if you can highlight why not.
Yeah, so the biggest difference between intentional inclusion and positive discrimination is illegal. So that's the main, you're not allowed to do it. Essentially, positive discrimination, so for really quickly, we have 9 protected characteristics in the Equality Act. And we cannot, so as employers, we cannot give someone a job or an opportunity solely based on that protected characteristic. So I can't just hire a load of women to boost up my stats. What I have to do, and intentional inclusion is about widening those goalposts. So if I am thinking, well, actually, I want to diversify, and at the minute, the only way of me doing that is just hiring a load of women, I need to think about the practices and the processes to attract more women into the process in the first instance. And usually it's looking at how we assess experience and what is qualified. So inclusion is not about solely giving someone an opportunity because of a protected characteristic. Inclusion is about creating an environment where everybody has the opportunity to succeed. You don't want to be in a position where, I know you used the phrase affirmative action, which was used in America in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, same thing. And that was focused on Black Americans, the Black American community, to get into medical school and law school, etc. That doesn't benefit anybody, because if you're the individual, well, it's tokenism. You're there for the sake of it. You're not actually, you could be great, but actually everyone will see that, well, you're only there because you're a woman. So the distrust that is, that you would feel personally, but also your colleagues would feel it's not worth doing it. What we look at from an inclusion perspective is we look at processes. We look at how we judge people, as in, what school, what A-levels, think about A-levels, go back to that rough area, okay? The average A-level grade will be lower in lower socioeconomic areas than it would be in the higher socioeconomic areas or an independent school. Doesn't mean those children are more intelligent, it means they've had access to more, greater, better opportunities, better structure, etc. So what are we doing to change that? So we're not saying that you, as a private school or an independent school student, you can't get a place at our medical school. What we're saying is we're going to redress the imbalance to appraise people, in a more equitable situation, which hopefully has answered the question.
Thanks. James?
Thanks. James Cashow.
Could you speak closer to the microphone, please?
James Cashow, thank you. First of all, thank you for a couple of fantastic talks, and I never stop learning, and thanks. Wearing also as a hat, as a college regional director, I'm very aware of the figures, and the Kennedy report was extremely sobering, is the politest term we could say. I could revert to Glaswegian. But the point is, the regional directors were probably one of the most diverse group of people. Now, I'm in a funny situation where on one hand, I'm a white adult male, going on a certain age. On the other hand, I actually belong to the world's smallest minority and a proud dad of 2 grown-up daughters who made me not surprised about the Kennedy report. I'm not disputing anything. What I'm trying to add is other subtleties, like our classifications of white European, white non-British is a very sensitive thing, because non-British European, whether they're Eastern Europeans or they're Mediterranean countries or Scandinavian, are actually a very different cultural group, and I am pretty sure that there is an element of unconscious bias and we need to accept it. There are good mentorship and even on individual, and I would beg your organizations to highlight people who are champions, and you know that the college is working on it. I think there's a lot of effort. We need to match them up so that we're not all firing off in different directions. And finally, one observation I made very long ago was that socioeconomic class and background and education sometimes, let's put it this way, even racial and gender bias. Somebody with the right socioeconomic class who might be wrong gender or racially, that trumps class background and socioeconomic. Basically, a well-educated private school educated, well-funded and supported female will probably out-trump anybody from things. I'm not saying we are concentrating, I'm just saying an awareness of a complicated subject. I apologize for a rambling answer.
I would, I think to get through the door, I think you're right to take your last point about privately educated, well-funded, well-supported, woman of colour.
I'm the dad of two of them. Sorry.
No, congratulations. But I would say, research would state that the experience of coming into an environment that isn't inclusive, where there is and I know you've referenced the Kennedy report, the boys' club, as it were, and I know there's been a huge amount of work and effort and energy to change, to implement the 16-point plan, but there will become a point in a career where actually, or a group of individuals, an environment where, unfortunately, your daughters will be, I'm like a doomsday, will be impacted by their gender.
Can I weigh in on something about discrimination? A few of my colleagues who have grown up in India might resonate with this. So I'll give you a bit of background. I come from an urban, educated Hindu Brahmin family. We are the majority in India. So I've spent the first 25 years of my life being the privileged class. I have never, ever thought I would sit here and talk about being a minority. And this is baffling for me because I'm on both sides. And I don't know if that's what's helped me. Because if you go back to medical school in India, the way, and it's rightly so, because of discriminatory socioeconomic practices that happen with the caste system, if you are a Hindu Brahmin, the equivalent of a white male, if you're a Hindu Brahmin urban educated family, you only had 20% of medical school seats because they had to up the game. But what they didn't realize is 50, 70 years after independence, all these, what were the caste system and the socially backward, they were equal on economic grounds. So the people who could afford medical school or afford their children to send to education were still the rich people or, educated people. So suddenly I was competing with friends who went with me to the same school, who had the same education, but they had a different caste. So they used to get ahead, and that was a bit of a problem around when you turn the tables. So that's when I think positive discrimination and intentional inclusion comes in, and the quota system. So I think you need to pause and you need to review as to what's happening and try to make it equitable. Great. So I think we need to pause. I think initially you need something, but eventually you'll have to review and see what your things are doing.
We're about to go into the coffee break, but I think we'll just take one last question, if that's okay with everyone, and then Steve, go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much for a very educational session. I just wanted to ask about affinity bias, and is this something that only happens in the workplace or in a wider personal life as well? And the reason I ask that is that if you look at people growing up, my daughter's at school, her best friend is someone who's got the most similar hair to her. And then teenagers will go to people who've got similar likes to them. You've got clubs at university and other social clubs where you get people who are like-minded doing the same things. Therefore, we're all sort of brought up to have a bit of affinity bias and link with the people who have the same interests as us. So therefore, is affinity bias only a problem in the workplace, or can it be a problem elsewhere as well?
Absolutely. It can be a problem elsewhere. I think that from a personal perspective, you could argue, well, that's someone I've got something in common with, and I've known them for a long time, and why would I need to change that? From a workplace perspective, obviously it's a bit, there's a lot more quantitative information as to why this is a negative, why this can have a negative effect. If this can impact my choices, then we can see how it will negatively affect somebody else. So absolutely, affinity bias essentially stems back from, you know, when we're looking to survive. It is pack mentality. You know, we don't see a wolf rolling around with a pack of lions. And affinity bias is essentially that, it's that safety. So do I think it's a problem? Personally, probably not. I think as long as we're in a position where our decisions aren't being impacted by it, and obviously we're throwing this sort of work angle on things, then, you know, if you're deciding that you're not going to go and see a particular mechanic because they don't look like you, or then arguably that's you know, not a positive decision, but it's more acute in work, I would say, particularly when we're in a position of influence and power, for want of a better phrase.
Especially with working with patients that come from all sorts of backgrounds and creeds and socioeconomic statuses. So thank you to our speakers, thank you to the audience, and we'll draw the session to a close. I believe there's coffee time now. Thank you very much.